between 1 John and John. And what I want to do is I teach Greek, and every year we go through 1 John. And I've just been astounded. Why do I do 1 John with my Greek students? Largely because 1 John is what I would call easy Greek. The writer for a book of 1 John repeats himself over and over again. He uses a smaller set of vocabulary, and he repeats that and recycles that, and he says the same thing twice. Once he'll say it positive, and then he'll say it negative. But it uses the same vocabulary, so it's very easy for first-year students getting their feet wet in Greek to read 1 John because of the way he formulates his sentences, basically. And what I've noticed is that there are certain places where 1 John and John connect. And so what I want to just show is that whoever wrote John, what I'm suggesting is also wrote 1 John, and indeed I think you can show Revelation. And in Revelation, the book of Revelation, it actually mentions I, John. Okay, so actually the book of Revelation is designated John. Now I know some people go for John the Elder, whoever that is, but from the early church, but the book says John, and traditionally it's been associated, the book of Revelation, especially with that name given, that I, John, is writing the book, kind of the same way Paul in his letters would identify himself, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ. So the book of Revelation, which has those letters to the 7 churches there, identifies himself as John. So, but this connection between 1 John and John is kind of interesting, I think. You see here in 1 John chapter 3, verse 14, it says, we know that we have, and then notice the word, crossed over. Metabino, cross over. Meta means beside or with or whatever. Bino means to go with, crossed over. Okay? And so we crossed over, we metabinoed. And what's very interesting here, this word metabino is used in the perfect tense, which is a special tense in Greek that's pretty rare. Normal Greek uses the present tense. Normal Greek uses as a background tense that's used all over the place what's called the aorist or aorist tense. So the present and aorist are used huge amounts of time. This perfect tense is very rare. Not really rare, but pretty rare compared to the present and the aorist are like this much usage. The perfect is down here. And what you have here is a perfect tense of metabino. So first of all, that word is very rare. First of all, flat out to cross over. That word is very seldom used in the New Testament in the first place. And then to have the perfect form of it, it only occurs in 2 places. The perfect form only occurs in 2 places. That we have crossed over from death to life. The have crossed over tells you it's the perfect tense, from death to life. Because we love the brothers. The one not loving remains in death. Now check this out. John chapter 5 verse 24. It says, I tell you the truth. Whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. He has crossed over. This is metabino again in the perfect tense. He has crossed over. This is the only other place where metabino is used in the perfect tense in the whole New Testament. And the word is rare in the New Testament anyway, and this matches exactly. But then notice what it says. He has crossed over from what? From death to life. He has crossed over from death to life. It's exactly the same phraseology. So not only do you get a rare word, metabino, in the perfect tense, but you also get over from death to life. And this is the only place in the New Testament where metabino in the perfect occurs, and then to have it followed up by exactly the same phraseology from a writer who is into idioms and saying, repeating himself, truly, truly, I say unto you. As soon as I say that, boom, truly, truly, I say unto you, where does that come from? It comes from John. John uses that, amen, amen, lego humin. Truly, truly, I say unto you. You know that you're in John. Okay? And when you see this life to death kind of thing, that's again a big idiom that John uses. And so here we have, there's no other place in the New Testament that has the verb in the perfect, let alone be followed by from death to life. So that's a good indicator that whoever's writing these books, that there's a commonality here between these. Now some people will say, well, that's because, 1 John or John even was written by the school of John, and so they adopted his phraseology, his terminology. Well, that's good. That's all conjecture. All I know is in these texts, there seems to be an exact parallel here that's found nowhere else, even close, and yet these are rare and they're found there. So it's again indicator, John, The only two places where that verb is used like that. Now here's another one. In John chapter 16, verse 24, it says, "Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete." That joy being complete, he says, 1 John chapter 1, verse 4 says, we write this that our joy may be complete, okay? That our joy may be complete. And so you get this joy may be complete idea parallel between 1 John chapter 1, verse 4 and John chapter 16, verse 24. So same type of phraseology keeps popping up. And I could go down a list of a ton of these parallels. The use of light and darkness. This phos meaning light, like photon, and scotia, darkness. And this contrast, this clear contrast between light and darkness. The writer of John does it, and the writer of 1 John uses that same contrast between light and darkness. And so there are these huge parallels. Another parallel that comes up is having been born of God, having been born gegenemonos, okay? This having been born of God kind of idea. It's found in John chapter 3, and we know this passage. This is Nicodemus. You've got to be born again, have to be gegenemonos. Again, it's used in John with Nicodemus. It's also used in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 9 and chapter 5, verse 1. So this idea of having been born of God idea, having been born of God occurs in John 3, and it occurs in 1 John chapter 3 and in chapter 5. So again, that's not normal phraseology. If you look elsewhere in the New Testament, you're not going to find that, especially, again, the word having been born of God, that having been born in the perfect tense, again, rare, very rare, and yet it occurs repeatedly in John and also repeatedly in 1 John. So again, he likes to repeat his phraseology, and so we'd expect to see that his letter follows from his gospel, very similar similarities going on there. And there are many, many more of these that we could go through and cite. These connections between 1 John at the verbal level, at the language level, syntactic level, semantic level, and things like that. These are the only places where they're used, in John and in 1 John. The only places where they're used. And that shows then that there's some sort of relationship between these two books. We would suggest a common author writes with the same idioms, the same style, and things of writing here. Now, Revelation, if you look over to the book of Revelation, like I said, Revelation clearly identifies himself as the writer is John. Okay? And in the book of Revelation, it's very interesting, this word nikao, basically means to overcome. And so in the book of Revelation, you have a couple mentions in the letters to the churches here in chapter 2, verse 7 and verse 11. In chapter 2 of Revelation, you've got this word nikao, to overcome, being used. You've got the same word, and it's not a very frequent word in the New Testament, but you've got it repeated in the book of Revelation. You've got it used in 1 John chapter 2, verses 13 and following, and you've also got it in John chapter 6, verse 33. And so again, this would link Revelation, this word nikao, these overcomers with Revelation, with 1 John, and with John. All three of them use this word that's not used very extensively outside the Johannine corpus. So that would link Revelation, 1 John, and John together and show Revelation's clear identification that John is the writer there. So